where having a neighbor was not very common there. It's a big area, very, very rural. So that pride in my young heart, many of you know this, it didn't just go away when I got saved. It followed me to New York, and it culminated to where in early middle school, my best friend and I began to plan out the rest of our lives. And this identity as a pastor's kid stayed with me to where I thought that no matter what I decided to do with my life, it would look good because I had the title of pastor's kid above my name. So Adam and I, my best friend, he grew up right down the street. We're still best friends. We became Indian blood brothers. And I won't explain all the details of what that takes. I'll just say we used my pocket knife. But we became Indian blood brothers on my parents' front porch. I don't think they knew about it. But we swore to each other that number one, we would never get married. And then number two, we were going to spend the rest of our lives in the military. We had a very specific career that we wanted. It involved jumping out of perfectly good airplanes. But I also wanted to fly. So we started to make these goals. We had these dreams. We went to the public library and got all the Air Force books and became these fighter jet nerds and aviation nerds. And that's what we wanted to do, both of us. But then the Lord brought a missionary family to my dad's church on a Wednesday. And they actually used to live at Shepherd's Bethel, Randy and Elaine Smith. They were missionaries in Papua New Guinea. They came to my dad's church on a Wednesday, and that afternoon I was outside shooting basketball with their oldest son, Matt. And Matt and I started to talk about my dreams. I started talking about what I wanted to do when I grew up and all this aviation stuff. Then Matt started to talk about missionary aviation, which in Papua New Guinea is a huge ministry. And I had never heard of a guy who flies small airplanes to get missionaries where they need to go, where they couldn't get otherwise. So I thought, okay, this is great. I'm going to go to the Air Force when I retire. I'll take all my free aviation training and go and live the rest of my life on a mission field. Well, that night, his dad, Randy Smith, gave their presentation. I don't remember what he said, but I do remember that as a pastor's kid, being one of the last ones to walk out of the church building, I could not walk down the steps that led outside the door. I stopped about halfway down the steps, and I remember the Lord, it almost seemed like he was placing his hands on my shoulders and pushing me down and maybe squeezing my neck a little bit. But by the time I walked out of the church building, the Lord had completely taken away my desires for the military, and I knew he was calling me into the ministry. So around that time, I started to notice a lovely young lady in my dad's church, partly because we were the only two eligible ones in my dad's church. But I started to notice her more and more, Rachel Lasher at the time, and I was scared to death because she's 2 years older than me, and she left early to go to college. She left when she was 16 to start college at Bob Jones University, 750 miles south, where three-quarters of the guys there are looking for wives. So I started getting scared. I knew she was going to be gone. I knew she was going to go 4 years straight. But the Lord brought her back her freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior years single. And then she graduated. There was a year between her graduation and my starting college because I started late. And we started dating. At the time, I didn't really know what the Lord wanted me to do. I knew it was the mission field. And my passion was Papua New Guinea because that's the field the Lord used to draw me to missions. So I just thought aviation in Papua New Guinea. And we talked about that a little bit as a couple, not much. So then I went to Bob Jones, and the Lord just started changing my plans again. I made specific plans, what my major was going to be, the classes I was going to take, how long it was going to take me to get through college. And the Lord very quickly started, again, kind of pushing down on me and showing me that it was His will that was going to be done and not mine. And I ended up changing majors 3 times. We got married partway through. I was halfway through my sophomore year when we got married and moved down to Greenville, South Carolina for me to finish up at Bob Jones. And I was able to finish. I squeezed a 4-year bachelor program into 7 long years of being a married town student with a full-time job. But that was what the Lord used really to get us where He wanted us to be. I was a missions major, and I knew I had to take an internship. My goal was Papua New Guinea, aviation in Papua New Guinea. But as a missions major at Bob Jones, for your internship, I was required to go at least 9 weeks to a foreign country. And we had Anna, she was 9 months old. I had a full-time job working my way through college. And I knew that was not the wisest thing for our family to do. So I got some counsel about it. I ended up changing majors and doing an internship through our mission board, Baptist Mid-Missions. And long story short, we ended up going to Alaska. Why? Not because I had a burden for Alaska, but because it was an easier mission field to get to than Papua New Guinea. I went to Alaska planning to go to Papua New Guinea. So we flew to Alaska. The plan was to be there for 6 weeks, to visit the village, the native village that you'll hear more about in a little bit. And the Lord used those 6 weeks in my wife and I's life to, without a doubt, call us to this area of Alaska. And at the end of those 6 weeks, the missionaries, Mike and Jeanette Clark, that we were visiting, they asked us to come back when I was finished with school and join them there in the ministry. They've been there in the village for 15 years, and their goal all these years has been to have a missionary team located in Iliamna, in this village. And then this team will be able to branch out to other villages. But the Lord hasn't seen fit to send anybody there. Then the Lord led them to tell us that we were the first couple that they believed the Lord was calling back to that village, to that ministry. So we took that from the Lord, went back to South Carolina, finished up, and started deputation last January. And we've been trying to get to Alaska ever since. So that's how the Lord's gotten us here. I'd like to share now a video. The video is kind of a general explanation of our internship, of our 6 weeks in Alaska. So you'll see pictures of our family, but they're outdated. And then after the video, I'll come back up and walk us through a PowerPoint of pictures with more details. And if you think of any questions during the video or the PowerPoint, afterwards I will open it up for as many questions as you have, and I would love to answer all those. So, brother, we'll go ahead with the video and then the PowerPoint right after. In 2018, my wife and I and our 9-month-old daughter flew into the Alaskan bush village Iliamna with Mike and Jeanette Clark in their mission plane. It was our goal to find out if the Lord wanted us to serve Him among the Yupik natives in Bush, Alaska through aviation ministry. In Iliamna and a few other bush villages, we spent the next 6 weeks learning how church planting, discipleship, and aviation outreach work in Bush, Alaska. During those 6 weeks working alongside the Clarks, we saw how the Lord is using their 15+ years of ministry to build Christ's church in these villages. And we also saw the need for a missionary team to be established there in Iliamna.
Hi, we are the Hutz family. Aaron, Rachel, Anna, James, and Malia. Aaron and I grew up in Christian homes where we were exposed to the gospel and gave our hearts to the Lord at young ages. We both attended the same small church in a farming community in upstate New York, where Aaron's dad is the pastor. Aaron attended Bob Jones University in Greenville, South Carolina, and graduated with a ministry and leadership degree. I graduated from BJU with a degree in music. Partway through Aaron's degree, we were married, and the Lord blessed our home with 3 children.
Since our time in Alaska, the Lord has continued to give us a burden for the people in Iliamna and the surrounding bush communities, and we believe He has called us to serve Him in this unique place. In 2021, we joined Baptist Mid-Missions, and we are benefiting from their 100 years of missionary experience. During our time in Iliamna, we observed the current church plant ministry there, Iliamna Baptist Chapel. We were able to help serve the church through Vacation Bible School, and the Lord used that to give us a love for the young people in the village communities. We were also able to serve through music ministry, preaching, and even some building upkeep. As we served in the church in Iliamna, our Lord burdened us for the village communities in the surrounding area where there is no consistent gospel outreach. Hundreds of these villages, including Iliamna, are separated from the road system and only accessible by airplane or boat. The Yupik people in these villages must hear the gospel of Christ, as many of them are deceived by the Russian Orthodox Church, which has influenced these villages for decades.
One of the villages in particular is the village of Livlak. We were able to fly to the village and hold a Sunday morning service with a small group of women and children. The eldest native believer asked Aaron after the service if he was the preacher she had been praying for. After experiencing a strong burden from the Lord, Aaron knew the Lord was calling our family to bring the gospel to these villages.
Since childhood, I have had a passion for aviation and plan to finish flight training once we arrive in Alaska. Seeing how the ministry works in the bush, it is clear that being able to fly is a necessity for effectively reaching these remote villages with the gospel. One of our ministry goals in Iliamna and the other villages is discipleship with those who come to Christ. The instruction our Lord gave the disciples during His time on earth prepared them to lead the early church. We want to train future leaders for these small churches through scriptural instruction. Would you please pray for our family as we follow the Lord's calling for us? Please pray for the people in this spiritually dark corner of the world that still need to be reached with the gospel.
But as we were allowed of God to be put in trust with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God, which trieth our hearts.
Okay, again, that was kind of an overview of our trip. Here's an updated picture of our family. Babies change a lot in a year. So the picture you saw, the picture on our prayer card, they are over a year old. So this is a picture just a few months old instead. But my wife and I have a very big burden, as any parent in the room can imagine, for our children. We do a lot of driving. We are in a different church almost every Sunday, and our children very typically do extremely well with this lifestyle, with this what we call a pre-field ministry, what we have for them right now. But as you can imagine, just the lack of regularity in church life, in friendships, especially in our kids, especially the older ones, is something that my wife and I are very aware of, and we're burdened for. Our children are our first and primary ministry. And if you would pray for us as we raise our children through deputation and then even in the field, when we get to Alaska, when we get to Iliamna, there won't be any children their age who are Christians. And that is a burden. Hopefully that will change very soon after we get there, as the Lord gives us ministry with the young people. But being in a small area where they are separated from really friends that they've made. When we were in college, Anna, our daughter, and even James had very close friends in our sending church, which is in Greenville, South Carolina. But we're going to be, so far away, and that's something that's very real to my wife and I. We're praying that our children do not grow bitter toward ministry. But again, this is all in the Lord's hands. Our children's hearts are in the Lord's hands, and we lift them up to Him. So this is our family. Again, Aaron, Rachel, Anna, James, and Malia. Am I supposed to point this up there to change the picture? Okay. This next picture, I point it up. I turned it off. I just turned it on. That's why it wasn't working. Okay. So I mentioned in my testimony my best friend Adam. He also broke our promise. He's married, and he is a father, a very proud father of a daughter. And he broke the other portion of our promise. He did not join the Air Force. He joined the Army. But we've kept in touch. We are still extremely close with he and his wife and their daughter. But Adam, for a while, was stationed in Texas. And I remember in school, in middle school especially, when I'm learning geography about especially the 50 states, when the pictures get all 50 states on one page, what happens to Alaska? Okay, it gets minimized and stuck down in the lower left-hand corner around Hawaii. Okay, now Adam, when he was in Texas, we would talk on the phone, and we would say things like everything's bigger in Texas. We've all heard that stuff. He would brag about things in Texas. And I remember one phone conversation Adam and I had where he was saying something about Texas, and I said, Adam, I found this T-shirt. I saw a picture of a T-shirt, rather. And on the chest of the shirt, it had the outline of Alaska. And on the inside was the outline of Texas. And I said, the caption underneath said, "Isn't Texas cute?" Okay, so, and I started to talk to Adam about the size of Alaska, and of course he knew that. But really, if you cut Alaska in half, both halves are larger than the state of Texas. It is our country's largest state. And I wanted to share this picture. It's not a super accurate picture. It's a picture of a flattened globe. But just to show you how far north Alaska is, it's farther north than most of Canada. I didn't realize that before. That red dot you see up there is approximately where in the state our ministry is going to be, in that south central part of Alaska. And you'll see there that the village Iliamna is about 230 miles southwest of Anchorage, which is the nearest grocery store, mechanic shop, auto parts store, anything. So, and there's no road connecting those two. The only way to get to these villages certain times a year is by airplane. Sometimes you can get there on a boat. But there are no roads connecting pretty much the western half of Alaska to the eastern half of Alaska. And then this is just to show you how close the state is to the country of Russia. You can see the mainland of Russia from 3 points on the mainland of Alaska, 55 miles apart. That actually has to do with our ministry, how close we are to Alaska. You may know that Russia used to own the territory Alaska. They were the ones who first discovered it. They discovered the native villages there. They began to settle it. They started to see all the potential in the fur trade industry. So their fur traders started to go over to Alaska. They would get ships full of furs and then take them back to civilization, and they would make a fortune selling furs. Well, Russia began to go through the Crimean War, and the United States was just finishing the Civil War when William Seward, one of the U.S. senators, thought it would be a good idea to purchase this chunk of property from Russia. And right after the Civil War, He spent the money and purchased Alaska from Russia. Russia needed the money because they were losing the Crimean War, so they sold it. At the time, that purchase was called what? Seward's Folly. Because everybody was thinking, why at the end of the Civil War would we spend a bunch of money when we're trying to recover on, it was called Seward's Icebox, on this frozen wasteland? Well, it turns out that that was an incredibly good idea because our fur traders started to go up, and then they discovered what? They discovered gold. And then they discovered oil. And Russia was like, oops. And they've been wanting it back ever since. But when Russia was there, when Russia began to find all these pockets of native communities, Anchorage didn't exist, Fairbanks didn't exist, it was just these native communities. They saw, spiritual death. And of course, the Russian Orthodox Church offers no spiritual life, but that was their religion. So all of their Russian Orthodox missionaries began to travel across the Bering Strait into these native communities and spread the Russian Orthodox religion. And at that time, the Alaskan Native people were so desperate for something other than their cultural religions because they were doing nothing for them in the Depression of the Dark Winters, that they swallowed Russian Orthodoxy hook, line, and sinker. And now the saying is, in these more traditional Alaskan areas outside of the cities, the saying is that to be a true Alaskan is to be Russian Orthodox. That, in a very large part, is their religion. They still very highly respect their native cultures, their native religions, but it's usually always in this large section of the state, a blend of their native traditions and Russian Orthodoxy. All these native villages have a Russian Orthodox church, and the priest of that church has a lot of respect and has a lot of say in these native areas. So it's a huge part of their culture. As I mentioned, you'll see Iliamna on the map, and you'll see Anchorage. That's about 230 miles. What does it look like to live in a village like this that's so far from the nearest grocery store? And you can't drive there. You have to get on a small bush plane and fly an hour and a half through the mountain range to get to the nearest grocery store. What does that look like? Well, thankfully, we got to see that firsthand when we were there, and it was a culture shock for us. But we loved it. The missionaries go shopping usually once every 3 months. They fly into Anchorage, they go to Costco, and they fill up 3 carts, Costco grocery carts. They fill them up full. And then they take them to a small, it's not really small, it's a public airport. And in Iliamna is an air taxi. That air taxi travels through all these villages. They deliver mail, groceries, and people. And all of your groceries get put on the air taxi airplane, and then we get charged over $1 per pound for all of our groceries to get flown to Iliamna. And it's the same with anything else. Building materials, cars, people drive vehicles in the villages. They have snowmobiles, they have four-wheelers. Everybody has them there. How do they get them there? Well, they actually can't fly those there like their groceries. So larger things like building materials, vehicles, tanks of diesel fuel, tanks of gas, because they do have a gas station in all these villages for their vehicles. All these things get put on a flat barge boat, and then they get sent up a river when it's not frozen over to the lake and then unloaded at all these villages. That's how they get their stuff. That's how the people live. So they do as much as they can without all of that. This is Iliamna. This is, you'll see that red roof building. That's the church building, Iliamna Baptist Chapel. And then the building just above that is the parsonage. And Baptist Mid-Missions has had a ministry there for quite a while, for a long time. Mike and Jeanette have lived there. That's where we stayed. We stayed in that building, the church building, while we were there. But this is how a lot of these native communities are laid out. It's spread out a little bit. They're somewhat close to each other, but the Alaskan Native people, we found out when we were there, are for the most part closed relationally to outside people. And it could take a very long time of trying to build a relationship with these people before you really feel like you've connected with them, until you feel like you can witness to them, you can share things with them. And the Clarks share with us that it was almost 5 years before they really felt like they were having opportunities to share the gospel, and it was really hard for them. But a lot of that is their culture. That's how they live. So what are some things that our family is planning on doing to help speed up that relationship building process? Well, these Native people, they aren't tradesmen. They aren't painters. They aren't electricians. They aren't plumbers. What do they do for a living? How do they live? Traditionally, they hunt and they fish. That's been their native culture. But now they need to do more than that. But for the most part, they hunt and they fish. And they do have jobs. Each village has enough jobs to support the population of that village, and that's it. The populations don't change much. But they hunt and they fish, and that's their lifestyle. That's a lot of what they do. Alaska has a ton of water. There are over 3 million lakes in the state of Alaska. That's over 2 times the amount of lakes in the rest of the 49 states combined. I shared that with a man in Minnesota, and he had a hard time believing it because, Minnesota is known for all of their lakes. And I said, yeah, this Lake Iliamna, right where the village is, Lake Iliamna is actually our country's largest freshwater lake other than the Great Lakes. And he said, no way, even larger than Lake, and he named one of the Minnesota lakes. And I said, yeah. And there's a ton of water in Alaska, and especially in this southern area, these villages are all built near water systems because that's how they live. They fish in the summer, and they live off of that for the rest of the year. So what the Clarks have done, the missionaries there, they've involved that lifestyle in their own lives. Partly because they kind of have to, because of expense. But they fish all summer during salmon season. The village almost shuts down. Everybody is fishing for salmon in the summer. A lot of the men will fly to the southern coast and go commercial fishing, and they make a lot of money doing that. And in the village, any man who didn't go commercial fishing, a lot of the ladies, a lot of the kids are all with their nets catching as much salmon as they can until they reach their limit, and they live off of that for the rest of the year. So we were able to help with that while we were there. And there are other ways that the Lord has used the Clarks. Again, this ministry there has taken a lot more, coming alongside of these people and working with them, learning fishing, learning hunting, doing it with them, and that has really helped the Clarks to build relationships with these people. Mike owned a construction business before he was a missionary, and the natives know that he knows how to build things. So anytime there's a building project, usually he's asked to come, and the Lord's used that to give him opportunities to share the gospel and to build relationships. This was a job that I was able to help Mike with. One of the villagers there ordered a yurt online. Apparently you can order these things online and have them shipped to your door, the door you haven't built yet. And they started to build this yurt, and they asked Mike to come because they knew he was a construction guy. So Mike and I went, and we helped build this yurt. And I was able to watch Mike have conversations with some of the natives just because he was asked to come and help build a yurt. But that's how they've been developing relationships with these people. It's been a lot of projects with them, helping them. These people aren't mechanics, but they all have vehicles. They aren't technicians. So what happens when their home appliances, what happens when their snow machine or four-wheeler breaks down? Well, again, Mike is a mechanic. He's an aviation mechanic. And the Lord has used him in these people's lives to come alongside them and help them in big ways. This is my second favorite picture. This is Leave Lock. So what Mike and Jeanette's ministry has looked like these 15 years is Mike is the full-time pastor in Iliamna. He has a church in Iliamna that he preaches in every Sunday. But what they have been burdened for is villages near this lake region that have no pastors, have no missionaries. Some of them have never been reached with the gospel before. And Mike and Jeanette have been so burdened for these places that they go to these villages only once or twice, maybe 3 times a year for a VBS or a basketball camp. And that's all they can really do because of their full-time ministry and responsibilities in Iliamna. So how can they reach these villages? Well, more missionaries, right? Our last Sunday there, Sunday morning, we radioed ahead to one of the believers in Levelock. If you look in this picture, it's going to be hard to see. But you see that big cluster of buildings right in the middle of the picture. If you look a little bit to the right is a large square of trees. Inside that square of trees is 1/4 of an acre of Baptist mid-mission property with a church building and a parsonage. And a couple times a year, Mike and Jeanette have been able to go to this village and either hold a Sunday morning service or, again, a VBS and basketball camp in this village of about 75 people. There are 3 native believers in Levelock, 3 native ladies who are Christians. So we went there on a Sunday morning. We flew in. We got to the property, and this is the parsonage. And, we kind of walked around before we went inside the church building. Nobody's lived here for well over 20 years. This ministry, there hasn't been a missionary here for over 20 years. So I'm looking at the parsonage thinking, okay, that could use some help. We go into the church building, which is kept up a little bit more because Mike and Jeanette go there a couple times a year. And I didn't get a picture of this, but before the lights were turned on, I was the first one to walk in the auditorium. And I got about halfway up the aisle, and I couldn't go up any farther. For some reason, it was the sight of the seat behind the pulpit where the pastor is supposed to sit. As soon as I saw that seat, it was like the Lord was again grabbing my shoulders and just pushing me down. And I knew that the Lord was calling us here. So 3 Alaskan natives came to the church. They brought 6 kids. And my wife and Jeanette Clark and all the kids were in the back for a kids' time. The 3 native ladies, Mike the missionary, and I were in the service. And I preached to Mike and 3 native ladies. And afterwards, Mike introduced me to Patricia, who is the oldest native believer there. And Patricia shook my hand, and then she, you know what this is like, she grabbed my hand with her other hand, she looked at me, and she said, "Are you the preacher that I've been praying for 20 years?" And I couldn't believe what she just asked me. I had no idea. I was going to Papua New Guinea until she asked me that question. I knew that's where the Lord was calling our family. So the 45-minute flight back to Iliamna in the mission plane that Mike was flying, we were talking about the service. And I told Mike that the 2 hours we spent in Levelock was worth the 6 weeks in that internship because I knew the Lord was calling us there. And we got back to the Clark's house, and that was our last night in Iliamna. The next day we were going to fly to Anchorage and then fly back to South Carolina. And they shared with us that at that time, 13 years, the last 13 years, they have been praying and praying and praying for more missionaries because they have had more of a burden than anyone for these villages. And they share with us that pastors looking for new ministries would come up and visit. College interns would come up and visit. And time after time after time, they did not feel that they were the ones the Lord was calling back, but they told us that for the first time in 13 years, they knew that the Lord was calling someone there, and they asked us to come back. And it was primarily for us, our burden was our time in Levelock. So what's this going to look like for our family? What's this going to look like for the Clarks? Well, this is the Iliamna air taxi. I mentioned this already. This is the backbone of travel in Southwest Alaska. It's the Pony Express, as you will. This is how everybody who doesn't have their own plane, this is how everybody gets to Anchorage. The air taxi has 4 Pilatus aircraft, single prop airplanes. They can carry a lot of cargo. They carry people, they carry mail, they deliver mail to the post offices in all these villages. They deliver school materials to all the schools, and they deliver groceries. Well, having a larger hangar area in Iliamna has been crucial for the ministry in this area, because all these other villages have gravel runways, and that's about it. But what Mike and Jeanette have been able to do is actually develop relationships strictly through having their airplane kept at this air taxi. You'll see the very tip of the wing in the lower left-hand corner. That's the Piper Cherokee 6 that Mike flies. It's the Baptist Mid-Missions plane there. And for the last years they've been there, they've had to rent outdoor space to keep their airplane on this airport because there's no room in the hangars. I don't have a picture of this, but Mike took me, if you look at the hangar building right there, way to the left, there are several buildings there, and then there's an empty lot. And Mike was talking to me about the possibility of starting to go through the paperwork of purchasing this lot so that they could have their own hangar. So number one, save money, and then also to use it as a ministry. Well, several years after we were there, Mike sends me this picture. This is the Baptist Mid-Mission hangar that Mike and Jeanette have been able to build strictly through work teams and finances raised from their supporting churches. They were able to build this commercial hangar to keep their airplane in. So you see all that snow outside. Now that's off of the airplane. And he keeps the hangar to a balmy 36 degrees in the wintertime to keep his airplane warm. Again, the Lord has used this to give him opportunities to minister to these people. That's his airplane in the front, the Piper Cherokee, and then the planes in the back. Other people need to keep their aircraft inside, and he has the space. He also works on aircraft in there for other people, and cars, and four-wheelers, and snowmobiles. How does this affect what our family is going to be doing? Well, right away, this hangar makes Iliamna a hub of ministry. This is where the 2 missionary families are going to live. This is where they're going to go out of. If you can picture with me a wagon wheel, you have the hub in the middle. And then like those spokes, we're going to alternate taking time going to these villages, going to Levelock, and actually living in these villages for several months at a time. Because that's when we start to see relationships build, when we're actually living with these people, helping them fix their house, using the trades that the Lord has given my wife and I that do not exist in these villages, but they need. Coming alongside these people for several months at a time and living there, and then coming back to Iliamna, and then the other family goes out. And then we alternate this kind of ministry. So one of the first things we're going to do is fix that parsonage in Levelock so someone can live there. And then this is the church building in Iliamna, Iliamna Baptist Chapel. We spent 6 weeks, 6 Sundays, worshiping the Lord in this church. And one of the biggest encouragements and honestly shocks that I faced there was how we were able to worship the Lord with people from all around the world in this little church, in this tiny Alaskan community of about 300 people. In the summertime, Iliamna has hunting and fishing lodges where people from all over come, pay a lot of money, and go out on hunting and fishing trips. So that makes Iliamna, number one, a little bit larger of a village in this area because of a little bit of tourism. But then also they have the air taxi. That brings in some more people. But in the summertime, during the busy season, the salmon season, these lodges and the air taxi hire pilots to come and fly for them. 3 of those pilots were Christians, and they attended the church during the summer. 2 were from Arizona, and 1 was from Texas. And then there's also a mining company located in Iliamna, the Pebble Mine, and they hired a helicopter pilot from Germany to come and fly for them. He was a Christian and he came to the church. And it was a reminder to me, we felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. We didn't feel like we were in the United States at all those 6 weeks. Mike and Jeanette have labeled this as feeling like you're on an island with 300 people. That's how we felt when we were there. But the Lord brings people all around the world to this tiny little church, and it was a reminder to us that it's our Lord's promise to build his church. And he will do this everywhere, even in these tiny Alaskan communities. And then this is the last slide. I know some of you are very familiar with deputation, just hearing from your other missionaries, but we drive a lot. So one of the things we ask you to pray for with us is that the Lord would keep us safe. The Lord allowed our family to be in a car crash last summer, and we totaled our vehicle. The other vehicle was totaled. None of us were harmed, and it was amazing the way it worked out. But we were able to take this experience and show our kids, listen, every church we're in, we ask people to pray that the Lord will keep us safe on the road. Look at how he answered that prayer in a car crash. And we're actually able to share with our children ways that God answers your prayers for our family. And it's one of the blessings of this life. And then secondly, we ask prayer that our children would enjoy deputation's pre-field ministry. They love it so far. Sometimes it's a little hard going into a new nursery or a new Sunday school class, but they have done so well. And we ask prayer as well for good connections and relationships with churches. Again, let me put a plug in for our email sign up. One of the ways we have a good connection with you folk is to stay in touch with you after tonight. In 2 months when we send our prayer letter. When we get to the field, you'll see how the Lord is working. We are planning a trip to Alaska to revisit the ministry this summer, Lord willing. And we'll be having a couple church meetings in some of the cities for deputation, as well as spending a good bit of time in the village, reconnecting with the church there, with the Clarks. And the hangar is being dedicated this summer to the Lord by Baptist Mid Missions, and they're having a service for that. So we're going to be going there for that. The plan is, when we get to Alaska, our first term for me to go right into flight school. I've had some flight training, but it's extremely expensive, and I have not been able to stay with it. So as soon as we get there, I'll be going to flight school in a school southeast of Anchorage, and Lord willing, we'll be visiting that school this summer. And we have a little jingle that our family has. Pray for mid-24. This is what we're praying for as far as a time frame for when we have full support and are able to go to Alaska. We have to move in the summer because everything is frozen in the wintertime, and we have to get all of our stuff there, including our Suburban. So the plan is for us to drive up through to Anchorage and then have our stuff put on a boat and sent up to the village, and that all has to be done in the summer. And we're praying that the Lord has our support and we're able to move there in the summer of 24. I'm done talking. If there are any questions, I would love to answer as many as you have. Again, we have prayer cards in the back. Yes, sir. The water quality is second to nowhere else in the world. It's incredible. It's all glacier fed year round. Several times while we were there, I walked to the lake and got a cup, dipped it out of the lake and drank it, and it was incredible. All the houses have wells, and they tap into the water system with wells. But yeah, the water quality is very good there. Yeah, it's very cold, but very good. Yes, sir.
What is Russian Orthodoxy, and what barriers perhaps would you fear?
Yeah. So Russian Orthodoxy used to be the exact same church as the Roman Catholic Church. About 1,000 years ago, we read about the Great Schism. which is when those two churches separated. And now you have the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is where you get Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox. And it's the second largest religion in the world. So a lot of Russian Orthodox is extremely similar to Roman Catholicism. They do not have a pope. They don't have any single reigning person who is infallible in all of his dealings. They don't recognize the pope. There is a difference in their view of the Trinity, but they still teach that Mary has to do with our salvation. They still teach that she was a perfect human being, that she never sinned. So you can think Roman Catholicism. How does that challenge our ministry there? The biggest challenge is how highly these Russian Orthodox priests are respected. Sometimes more so than the village chiefs. There is no law enforcement in these villages. So the U.S. government gives these Alaskan communities, a lot of them, just kind of to their own tribal system. And they have village chiefs. But they also have the Russian Orthodox priests. And they all preach a works-based salvation. And one of the most confusing things to me is to see this kind of life, and it's really clear in this area of our world where in the wintertime you have so much darkness. There is a lot of alcohol in these villages, a lot of drug use. But yet these people wholeheartedly believe in a works-based salvation. And that poses a threat to any missionary, but truly we know that the Lord is in control. But yeah, when you think of Russian Orthodox, think of, for the most part, Roman Catholicism. It's very similar. Yes, sir. This area is not as bad as the middle, like Fairbanks and north of that. We haven't been there in the wintertime, but we talked to the Clarks about it, and they said that the shortest day, they get about 4 hours of daylight in the wintertime. We were there for 6 weeks in the summer, and we didn't see a single star, which I was really disappointed about. I was hoping to see all the stars, but it doesn't get dark enough all summer. It gets dusk, and that's it in the summertime. In the wintertime, it's the opposite, where every day you'll get a little bit of daylight in this area, but it'll get down to just 4 hours of that. And that is something that they have really struggled with. Jeanette especially shared with us that when they were there, that was one of her biggest struggles, was the darkness in the wintertime. And there's some kind of hormone in your brain. I don't know much about the human body at all, other than pain, but there's a hormone in your brain that gets triggered when you're in all this darkness. And my wife found a statistic online that there are certain foods that you can eat to really help with this hormone. And two of the top ones on the list was salmon and blueberries. And Alaska is full of salmon and blueberries. It's like the Lord put those there. So that was encouraging to us. And Jeanette also shared with us that having a wood stove in the house with a glass door where they could see the firelight in the wintertime really helped her as well in the darkness. Yes, ma'am? They all speak English. Which sometimes is a language barrier for me anyway, but they all speak English. They kind of study some of their native languages, and some of the elders will speak the native languages. Before basketball games, a lot of times the natives, sometimes the youth will do native dances and they'll sing in their native languages, but they all speak English. Yeah. Yeah, they are superstitious about a few things that we know of so far. One of them is Mike and Jeanette, they don't eat bear meat because the natives have a superstition that there's some connection between bear and human beings. I won't go into details, it gets graphic, but the natives will not eat bear meat. So we have to be careful about that. And then they part of their tradition, they worship the spirit of the animal. We don't get into that, even to respect it, but we are careful about things like that, yeah. Yes, ma'am. We are hoping to have a greenhouse. This whole area is all tundra, and it's pretty much moss and gravel. You can't grow anything in this area. But Jeanette has had a greenhouse, and it's done okay. We're hoping to do as much as we can with a greenhouse. We're also planning on having chickens. We had talked about the possibility with Mike of doing goats, but goats for some reason are like bear candy in this area, so nobody will have goats. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the feathers. Bears don't bother chickens, so we're hoping to have chickens as well. Yes, sir.
Why is there not stores? Why can stuff not be shipped in, built in? Everybody has to get stuff.
There aren't enough people. Yeah, so why aren't there stores in these villages? There are 3 now. One just started. There are 3 little convenience stores in Iliamna where you can go and you can buy a gallon of milk for $15 a gallon, you know. And they have things like that where you can go and you can buy canned food, ramen noodles. They have frozen stuff there. But they don't have any large grocery stores because there are only 300 people in the village. And it's just the people, they hunt, they fish, and they go shopping 230 miles away. And that's what they've done. And as far as, you know, any other kind of store, they have a gas station, self-serve gas station, but there's not the population to support the stores. Yes, sir. Yeah, so our mission board has gotten with Mike and Jeanette Clark about our support level, how much we need to raise. When I first saw the number, I was very discouraged. They told us that we need to raise about $100,000 a year to live there and to raise a family there. And 20% of that right away goes to aviation. 20% of that support. And because so much of our ministry has to do with the mission plane and how expensive it is to use the mission plane. A lot of that goes toward, you know, $1 per pound for all of your groceries. So in general, things are more expensive. And especially when you get out of the city into the village, it's even more expensive. So it's about, I think it comes about $8,500 a month, what we need to raise. And right now we're a little over 30% of what we need. Anybody else? Okay. Summer's about 3 months. The saying that we heard up there is you get 9 months of winter and 3 months of company. Everybody wants to go to Alaska in the summertime. So yeah, they last about 3 months. If that's everything, I'll turn it over to the pastor. Thank you so much for your time. And again, we'd love to stay in touch with you folk. But thank you.
And they'll be at the back table. Once any more questions you have, I'll come. And there'll be an offering plate. Put it right in front of the door. So you have to knock it over on your way out. And there'll be a lot of for them. You just pray for them and work back home too. So we'll close tonight by 40 minutes.
All I ever want to be.